We are lesson 2, principles and strategies for successful communication in groups. So we're looking specifically at, writing reports together, holding meetings in virtual space. And of course, there are other things that you will need that you may be doing. But these are 2 particular examples. So for example, now, of course, holding meetings in virtual space is a real thing. Almost everything that you do now takes place virtually. And so you have, in business, you tend to have 2 types of meetings, and they may never call them this. They'll just say it's a meeting, right? But usually it is a coordination type of meeting or problem-solving meeting. It can also be just, it's either a coordination meeting or a problem-solving meeting. They're never, ever going to call it that, okay? They're just going to say it's a meeting. But if most of the meeting is about roles, goals, and accountabilities, it's a coordination meeting. They're trying to get a handle on who is going to do what. And oftentimes, when you're put on a project, that's exactly how it's going to start. They're going to start with a coordinating type of meeting. They're going to discuss the roles. They're going to discuss what their goals are and how people will be held accountable.
Professor.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have a question. So when you say meetings, is it usually like a video meeting, or it can be a chat as well?
A chat wouldn't necessarily, when you say a chat, you mean like
typing stuff?
Typing chat?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you really, honestly, most corporations are not going to do do a meeting that way. They're going to do a conference call, or they're going to do a video meeting. Okay, they're not going to do a chat meeting. Now, it doesn't mean that they will not use chat, right? But that very few places use that as a way to quote unquote meet. That's not a meeting. That's a chat. It's a chat box. Mm-hmm. But so no, that would not be used to establish goals, roles, and accountabilities. No, that wouldn't be used for that. They might reinforce that in a chat, but they're not going to use that to establish that. Does that make sense?
Gotcha. Thank you.
So if it's not a coordinating meeting, then it's going to be a problem-solving meeting. Okay? So the problem-solving meeting is basically they're going to, what's the issue, right? And how do we solve it? So a problem-solving meeting is just that. What is the issue, or perhaps multiple issues? And what are some possible ways we can go about trying to solve it? Now, again, I'm going to reiterate, they're not going to call it a coordinating meeting. They're not going to call it a problem-solving meeting. They're just going to say it's a meeting. But usually it's one of these kinds, okay, to one degree or another. Here are some questions, but before I get into the questions, the other part is sometimes you may be in charge of organizing the meeting, letting everybody know the time, the date, and the place for the meeting, and perhaps even arranging a schedule. So these are some essential questions if you are tapped to plan a meeting. And this could be at work. This will work for family things. This will work for perhaps current and future school projects and when you have to work in a group. What is the purpose of the meeting? What outcomes do I expect? Who should attend? When should the meeting be scheduled? What roles and responsibilities should people at the meeting have? So, for example, you may be the person to arrange a meeting, right? But there might be another person whose goal is to, I don't know, we always like to have food, right? Secure the food, right? Somebody else might secure the location. Sorry, my writing is really horrible with this thing. Secure location, meaning the physical space, right? Somebody else might be bringing whatever, I don't know, anything you can think of, paperwork, paperwork, right? Or material. And that could be in the form of reports, printing and putting reports together, because it could be a working meeting or a working lunch. So you might be responsible for coordinating all of this under the guise of planning a meeting. Could you try and do all of these things? You could, but that wouldn't necessarily be wise. So, you delegate those things, and that's a way to make sure that everyone is involved in helping sure that the meeting goes smoothly. So these are just some questions. Here goes some other ones. What will be the agenda? Right? What are we going to talk about? What's the order of what we plan to talk about? What material should I distribute prior to the meeting? Do you want people to have already read a report or already read a summary or a profile prior to coming into the meeting? When and how should I invite others, right? It might be via email. That might be your first point of contact. And then it might be a follow-up with a phone call. So how you should invite them. What logistical issues do I need to take care of? Here's some of the things I was alluding to earlier. Reserving a room, getting equipment, printing materials. Okay. So it's not just, oh, there's a meeting and we just show up. There's all these other pieces that go along with it. And has anybody ever been to a good meeting?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what made the meeting good?
I came.
Go ahead.
I got it. All right. I came out of it learning something, meaning I went in it maybe not fully aware of how I was. I'll give you a prime example. So I had started out, this is my first time as a fitness manager. I knew enough to know how to get my job done, but I needed to learn more about how to get others to do their job.
Okay. Fair enough. Good. Who else? Go ahead. I heard.
Mm-hmm. It was well organized. Like since the meeting was so organized, like everybody just knew exactly what to do, and we just got everything, like all the information out of everyone, and it was just well organized. So everybody was like on the same page.
Good. Awesome. So, I think is that Mujahid and Kelvin?
Yes.
Okay. So, in both situations, there was clarity, and I'll even probably say there was some efficiency, right? Because the second person, if that's Kelvin, I'm not sure if it is.
Yeah, it is.
talked about organization. Mujahid talked about clarity. He was clear about his job, but he had to learn about other people's roles and probably how they impacted his role. And then Kelvin talked about it being organized. So when something is organized, 9 times out of 10, it's efficient. They don't waste time, right? We like to say, at least in New York, time is money. And so we want people to be efficient, right, with time and being orderly. And these kinds of plannings, when you plan for a meeting, you can help it so that it is orderly, so that it brings clarity to everyone, so everyone knows what their role is, and people feel good about that. And then they'll come to another meeting, right? And they won't come grudgingly to another meeting, but they'll be happy to come to the next meeting. So creating and distributing the agenda. So most agenda items are going to have, they're going to have the items, right, that you plan to discuss. They're going to have time frames, right? They're going to discuss the time frame. Now, time frames can shift, right? But there's an ideal. You might want to get something done in 2 days, and it might actually take you 3. The other part that's going to be on an agenda, are goals and expected outcomes. So after doing such and such, after doing X, Y, Z, the result should be ABC, right? Then the roles, who is going to do what, right? And what do we need in order to do these tasks? So you see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things that normally should be on an agenda. Okay? The items that are going to be discussed, the time frames that are needed to accomplish the items that are on the agenda, the goal, in other words, so you may have an agenda that lists 4 items, and each item they're going to suggest may take 10 to 15 minutes, right? And so if you have 10 to 15 minutes and you have 4 items, how much time is that? How long is that meeting?
Can you repeat that again?
Yep, here it is. You have an agenda. They say item 1, 10 to 15 minutes. Item 2, 10 to 15 minutes. Item 3, 10 to 15 minutes. Item 4, 10 to 15 minutes.
Round about an hour.
Like
right. Yep. So basically that's the reason why oftentimes they will have an hour-long meeting, is because they are assuming that there's a certain number of items and they are guesstimating how much time it will take to discuss each item. Now, can they change it up and say the first item, we actually only think that's going to need 5 to 10 minutes? Yes, they can do that, right? Another item may only take 5 minutes to discuss, but this is sort of what, it should be, or what how you get to your hour-long meeting. That's what they mean by time frames. That's what they're getting at, okay? And that's, again, that time frame is how long do we need to discuss this particular issue on the agenda, okay? So, in order to run effective meetings, there are some things that the person who is facilitating, the meeting needs to do. And not just the person who's facilitating the meeting, but the company, the department, the manager needs to do to help their department or their team have good meetings. They need to create tradition, right? And what does that look like? What does create tradition? Well, create tradition is, simply like, it could be something as simple as a check-in, good afternoon, how's everybody doing? What's one good thing that happened today? Or what's one good thing that happened in the past week? And everybody kind of just reports in, and people learn a little bit about things that are important to someone, and about important to their teammates. Creating a check-in can be a great tradition or a good thing to do as part of a weekly or monthly meeting that your department has. Culture. So that just, you're creating a tradition, a routine, but you can also have a culture. The culture is, we deal with the hard things, right? We don't allow meetings to end with animosity. we settle, or we at least come to some type of agreement, even if it's temporary, before we leave. And variety. Variety just has to do with, sometimes you might have a meeting that has, you see where my head is at. You might have a meeting with food, or snacks or treats, or just something that kind of keeps at people's blood sugar up and paying attention. Or something that's fun, an activity or something like that, the group or the team can do together. Okay, so that's just something that creates bonding, and it establishes, everybody knows that this particular department has great meetings because they check in with each other, they deal with, the issues that present themselves, and they're always doing something that's fun. They do a little something that kind of makes people feel good and feel better about themselves. You set expectations and follow the agenda. There's nothing worse than constantly going to a meeting within a department or for a company, and they never ever follow their agenda. Now, sometimes things do happen, and the agenda, sometimes you have to toss it because other issues come up or things happen. But it's important to set expectations and to follow the plan that has been laid out. Because if not, then what happens is people will begin to feel that their time is not being used properly. And in all honesty, you start to mess up the credibility, right, of the facilitator, of the department. You always say this is the agenda, but then we never follow it. Right? So that means your competency, or the department's competency in organizing and holding meetings, is now in question. You encourage participation and expression of ideas, right? You want to hear from other people. You don't hog the mic, right? You don't hog the microphone. You pass it along so that other people have an opportunity to offer their thoughts. Even if they decide that they don't want to, you still want to try to provide an opportunity so that people will want to share, or at least perhaps eventually will feel comfortable to share, participate, and express their ideas. Also, the goal is to build consensus and then have a plan of action. If you don't build consensus, meaning if you don't have some level of democratic agreement, right, then you don't have really a team that's united to accomplish the goals that need to be done, or the various tasks that might need to be completed within a company or a department. So consensus is important because that lets you know, as the manager or the team captain, or that everybody's on the same page as it relates to getting the marketing done for the next iPhone 12 or iPhone 13, which I'm sure is in the works as we speak.
Coming out tomorrow.
I'm sure.
They actually revealed a picture of the new iPhone 13, but that doesn't.
That's hilarious. I was joking.
Yeah, but
I swear to God, they actually posted a picture, and people are commenting on the comments like, it's the iPhone 12 already released like a few months ago. Why are they releasing new pictures of the new iPhone?
Because listen,
It's
this
marketing,
is how,
baby. Marketing, baby.
Well, it's not just the marketing, but it's not just the marketing. But what I'm trying to get at is that they have a team of people who are working. Even as they released iPhone 12, they had another team already working on iPhone 13. And why is that? Well, technology continues to move. I mean, pretty much at this point, it's like at the speed of light, right? Every time and it's not just Apple, other companies are doing it as well, but it's just that we know Apple. It's been around for a very long time, or at least as long as you all have been alive. I remember when the first Apple Commodore came out. I'm dating myself, but nevertheless, the whole point I'm saying is that they have teams. They have teams of people who are constantly improving and working on product improvement or product development, They have another team of people who are doing the marketing. They have another team of people who are dealing with customers as they have a user experience, right? With the iPhone 12 and with iPhone 11 and with iPhone 10. And the reason why they have these teams is because they know that iPhone 13, 14, and 15 are going to need to constantly be better, and they can't be better unless they are having meetings and talking about the information that they are finding as they work on these different teams. So Apple's a great example of how teams work, because it's not just the same group of people working on the same iPhone. There was the team for iPhone 8, and that might be different from iPhone 10, and that is more than likely different from iPhone 12. So they are constantly meeting in some type of routinized fashion to be able to deal with these things and deal with that so that they can get the next iPhone out to the masses of people who are going to put down that money and buy it. And then, of course, so you have to close the meeting, right? Close the meeting. How do you end? Thank you so much for showing up. Hopefully, if it was a good meeting, we got something done, we know where we're going. Or I understand people have, some mixed feelings about what our next steps are, but we're going to make it happen. We're going to, tweak what needs to be tweaked and come back and discuss this again. And then they deal with difficult people, right? They deal with people who are challenging, who don't know how to work on a team and perhaps don't want to work on a team. And so that happens as well. So sometimes people just need to improve their communication skills, their people skills. And then unfortunately, sometimes too, you do have to remove people from the team, right? Because they are not helping or contributing to it moving forward. They're holding it back. So these are some things to keep in mind. Again, you've heard me say it, but here it is in print. Every meeting should have a facilitator, okay? And the facilitator's goal or job is to make sure that people are participating in the conversation and that each agenda item gets discussed. They're not a dictator, they're not the boss, they are not the tyrant of any kind. Their goal is to make sure that democracy in some shape or form is present, because if it is present, then the likelihood is that you're going to have a much better meeting than you would if you did not. Okay, so the facilitator the role of the facilitator can also change, right? So you might be the facilitator in one meeting, somebody else might be tapped to be the facilitator in another meeting. But your goal, if you're tapped to be the facilitator, the organizer of the meeting, is just to make sure that people are participating. Oh, Jonathan, I see that you haven't said much. We'd like to hear your thoughts on this particular item, or what are your thoughts, or what are you thinking? So you want to get people to participate and make sure you discuss all of your agenda items. So here's some more specific help as it relates to closing the meeting, okay? You want to ask how much information, analysis, and interpretation did I provide, right? So in other words, did you present information? Did you present analysis? Did you present any type of interpretation? How much, right? And the reason why you're asking this question is to assess, kind of where you, what's the right word? How do I want to say this? You want to assess, what you gave, right? In terms of the in terms of the topic that was presented, did you give enough information? Did you provide enough analysis and interpretation? You want to think about what you gave at the meeting. Then, the next question is, did I communicate my ideas, even if they conflicted with someone else's, right? So the goal is, making sure that you offered your ideas, even if others don't necessarily agree. Did I participate in the implementation of the timeline? Did I meet deadlines? Did I facilitate the decision-making process, or did I just go with the flow? Especially for those people who like to just kind of sit back and let other people do it,
Definitely not.
We have people who like to hide in the shadows because they think it's safe there. And people who go with the flow, if that's your personality, I'll just say this, that even that is making a decision, right? Even in that, it's making a decision. So you want to,
can I
go ahead.
When you go with the flow, you essentially give up a lot of your input on what's going on.
Yeah. I mean,
if you didn't contribute to the decision-making process, or you didn't put anything in, I can't really take your opinion very valid.
Well, I mean, the bottom line is that even when you don't think you are making an active decision, can somebody mute? Because I'm getting some feedback. Oh, thank you. So the thing about it is that even when you do not seemingly or actively make a decision, you are still making a decision. So people who go with the flow or who don't like to upset the apple cart, you are still implicitly making a decision, right? And your decision is in some ways by omission or by not saying anything, but that's still making a decision. You are still, in effect, choosing a way to go. It is just not vocalized. But these are just questions to think about, especially if you are the facilitator. But these are still great questions to ask yourself as you participate in meetings at work. Especially these questions in particular, if you're not the facilitator, these last 4 questions are still great ones to ask yourself and to think about. If you are the facilitator, then these are the questions you need to be thinking about. So, follow up after meetings. I don't know if any of you have ever participated or are participating in any student groups, a lot of times, or certain key committees. A lot of times they'll have somebody whose job is to do the minutes of the meeting, right? And that is a way to keep everybody on the same page as to what was discussed and talked about in the meeting. So things like the date and the time, the team members present, the meeting roles, the key decisions, the key discussion points, the open issues, meaning the issues that perhaps were not completely closed or fully addressed, or that need to be tabled to the next meeting, and then action items and deadlines. So usually when somebody does the minutes of a meeting, sometimes it can be a secretary, sometimes it's somebody who's just good at taking notes. I know in department meetings, when we have that, there's somebody who's taking notes, who's taking minutes, But these are some of the things that you need to think about, or these are the things that need to be part of doing the minutes of a meeting. And again, it helps people, it helps the group, it helps the company, it helps the department, the team stay on task. And it's also a record, right? It's a record of what took place. And that's the reason why it is done. It is a record. You do oftentimes too, if you haven't heard of it, probably not in this past year, but pre-COVID, right? They had court reporters, right? People whose job is they sit in court, and that this is basically what they do for a living, right? They sit and they literally take the notes, everything that is being said by the lawyer, the plaintiff, the defendant, the judge, all of those things are recorded, and that can be, it's usually a transcript, right, of the case, and it can be, read and or accessed. But this is what is necessary. Of course, we've already talked a little bit about virtual teams. Everything is pretty much virtual. And even as the world continues to open back up, it will still many things are going to stay virtual. Or there will always be a virtual component. So virtual teams are now more than ever going to be very, very present. If you have not found yourself working virtually or working on a virtual team at some point, I can almost guarantee you that you will, okay? So this consists of team members located at various offices and even perhaps in various countries, and they rely almost entirely on virtual technologies to work with one another. So the chat function that Ilya mentioned about 15 or 20 minutes ago is perhaps a function that will be used to be able to work with somebody on a project, even if they're in another country, right? Yes, the chat function will be used for sure. Okay, and that's just one part of it. It'll be multiple virtual technologies, not just one, but perhaps even several. Okay, so virtual teams, believe it or not, also save companies millions, if not billions of dollars. Think about it. In past times, a company might send a person on a plane or on a train, right? And they go to another state, another country. Well, they want the person to go there, so they've got to pay for it. Then they got to pay to house them in a hotel. Then they got to pay, they have to make sure that the person has to eat, right? Then they still have to get their salary, right? And so working virtually saves them hotel, airfare, and dining out expenses. So companies save a lot of money with virtual teams. So trust me, virtual teams are going nowhere. Working on a virtual team, focus on building trust at each stage, right? If it's possible, you want to meet in person, and in person may mean via video, right? I think initially they may have said or may have desired in person as physically, but we know nowadays that that might not always be likely unless you're in the same area. But even if you can't meet physically, you can still meet quote unquote in person virtually. You want to get to know one another, get to know your team members. Use the collaborative technologies that are available to help you have the meetings and to forge these types of connections. You want to choose an active team leader, somebody who's going to be, on it and trying to, and who's going to be encouraging, who's going to have some energy, who is going to try to bring people together. Okay. That will be important. As I'm sure you all know, and even as was demonstrated here, many of you come to class and your screens are off. So, I mean, imagine working like that, like really working like that. That after a while you would get bored and frustrated, and you'd want to talk to the person, or to the people, your team, especially if you're supposed to be getting something done. So here's a how-to, right? Run effective virtual meetings. Here's a how-to. You start the meeting with the social chat. I already talked about that. You could even start with a contentious question, something that'll get people kind of thinking, and no, I think this, and no, I think that. And then you can pose, what do you think about questions? And this could be a great way of bringing in or focusing people on what the agenda or what the meeting is going to be about. Then you make sure that each team member is involved and that people articulate their views, right? You have a person who is designated or volunteers to take the minutes of the meeting, right? In real time, meaning as everything is occurring, the person who's taking the minutes is recording, they're writing it down. When you are having a virtual meeting, like when you are in class, you want to focus on your teammates, your classmates, your professor, and not multitask, right? And then here it is in black and white for all y'all to see. Use video when possible. Use video when possible. So, unless there is a drain or your particular piece of technology does not have the capability, everybody, screen should be on. I'll give you a perfect example. Yes.
Hello.
Yeah.
He's just indicating that he got a screen on.
I'm just indicating I got my. I'll turn it on. Like I don't have a problem with it being.
Well, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about all the other folk who got their screen off. Talking about all the other people who got their screen off. There's a cost to anonymity. Okay, I get it, but there's always a cost to anonymity, just like there's a cost to being known. There's a cost to being unknown too. So this is not how you function at work, right? You don't function with virtual, with your screen off the entire time. And I'll just say, like I said, I moonlight in my other life. I have graduate students, and in all honesty, it's such a weird difference because I don't have this issue where everybody comes to class with their screen off. Very different. Everybody comes to class with their screen on. So I just find it very jarring that many of you come to class and your desire, particularly in a communications class, is to have your screen off. It's very antithetical to sort of how it actually should be happening. Nevertheless, we move on. Group writing. Ideally, it would be great for us to practice this here in this class. I know that there are other classes for which you will do this. So keep this in mind. These are some things for you to keep in mind, whether it is while you're at BMCC or beyond. When you have a writing project, especially when it's a group writing project, you do want to start right away. You want to have a meeting and you want to establish roles and responsibilities. Okay? You work together at the planning stage. You want to make sure your roles and contributions are fair. Ask questions, seek the professor's help. You want to stay flexible and open. You want to meet in real time consistently, whether that is in person or via video, and ensure that the writing reflects the views of the group. And the group or the team, there's no I. So whether you're using the word group or team, This I is not in it. Okay. So even in the writing, it should reflect the team or the group. When you think of your favorite artists, singers, etc., if they are in a group, while each person may get a moment to shine, the goal is that they sing in unison. Because if they are not in unison, it's not going to sound good. Discuss how you will edit the document together. And then you might also want to consider a single group member, a person who's good to just polish the final version, right? And make sure that the voice is consistent throughout the document, especially if you're doing a report. Okay, it's 12:10. Here we go. 5 minutes. I'm gonna hit it and quit it. Basic principles for handling difficult conversations. Oftentimes you're gonna either have inherent diversity or acquired diversity. Inherent diversity involves traits such as age, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, just to name a few. Acquired diversity involves traits that you learn through experience, your work experience. So some of you have indicated that you have customer service background, or maybe retail or construction or engineering, but the acquired diversity is the diversity that you gain through your work experience. The inherent diversity involves your identities, the things that you identify or considered, that you identify with. So your age, your gender, your ethnicity, and sexual orientation. Behaviors that drive diversity or that help is one, you make sure that everyone is heard. This is a repeat, okay? So at this point, nothing that is going to be said is going to be new. You want to make it safe to let team members express their novel ideas. Novel meaning new. It's a great word to look up. It is not just a novel of a fictional story. Novel also means new. You want to give team members decision-making authority, especially if you are the facilitator or the manager or the department head, right? You want to share credit. Oh my God, I could spend a whole lot of time on this, but I won't. Share credit. If you know it wasn't your idea, don't take credit for it. Share the credit. Give people their due. You want to make sure you give useful feedback. There's nothing wrong with somebody, with you or somebody offering critique, but we all know those people who oftentimes they can never say anything positive or anything useful to help you move forward. They always just have critique. They always have critique.
Some people take it personally, the feedback sometimes.
Yeah.
I think that's a problem.
It is important to encode the message and try to make it understand it in a way, and trying to understand the other person how it feels too, because some people don't might react to of what you're saying right away, and it's a trick thing to manage, but it's important to keep what the message, the meaning of your idea, it's going to be delivered to that person, also too.
Yeah, Angela, I agree with you, man. I think a lot of times when you give constructive criticism, or you just give, I mean constructive criticism. You give constructive criticism, a lot of the times, you're right. You might have to worry about how someone takes it. But if it's in a business setting and we need to get it done, you can't be sensitive. You need to understand it's a job.
Oh no, yes, I understand.
I'm not saying you. I'm speaking in terms of what you're saying.
I work in teams all the time. I've been working in restaurants for like my entire life, so I definitely work along with people. And some people might not take it, some stuff that you say in a good way, but it's also you have to understand. Well, me myself, I try to understand that we are not in the same position in terms of the other person, how it feels. What is the person's going through. And I'm saying, okay, I understand. I don't say anything else. Just trying to keep it personal, not personal, more like
I know
an environmental situation, and what the actual goal it is. You know what I mean? Because sometimes we get out of track. Because sometimes we let our feelings go through something, but actually it's not the goal. The goal is this, but we're going to the right. It happened to me a lot of the time. But I actually was able to, see that a little bit. But
okay,
yeah, I hear you, man.
All right, I gotta chime back in because we technically got a minute left. So the idea here in mentioning useful feedback, right? The whole goal is that sometimes what happens is my point in mentioning that is that constructive feedback can be useful if people can also find something to appreciate as well. Sometimes people will be able to hear the constructive feedback if they are also given a compliment. So in other words, giving critique, even though the critique might be valid, it might be hard for someone to hear, but they might be able to hear it if there is a compliment, if somehow encouragement or praise is given, then they might be able to hear the feedback, especially if it is useful, meaning that it's not just the critique, but it's also in the critique, you also give them a suggestion for how to move forward. Okay. The other thing is putting the feedback into action. So if you are the recipient of constructive critique and they have provided a suggestion for how to move forward, consider it and try it. Okay. Sometimes you won't always be on the end where you are giving the feedback. Sometimes you will be receiving it. And so just like people have to learn to receive it, we also have to learn to receive constructive feedback and be willing to consider it and put it into action. I'm going to mention these two things and then I'm going to be done. So just bear with me another minute or two. Disassociation. This is the process by which professionals can accept critique. They can hear the critique of their ideas without personally becoming defensive. Just because you have an idea doesn't necessarily mean if somebody shuts it down or cuts it, doesn't mean that they cut you. It's just your idea that they don't particularly care for, right? But people who can disassociate, they can hear the critique and understand that the person is not coming for them, right? Association is when the person and their idea are so intertwined that you critique them and they just cry because they feel like as you critique their idea, they're taking it personally. Okay. All right. The rest of this stuff is in your book. It's just sort of rehashing a few things. Embrace difficult conversations, assume the best in others, although I know that that's challenging. Adopt a learning stance, stay calm, overcome noise. Remember, we talked about the different types of noise, and oftentimes there will be noise, not just physical noise, but a whole lot of other kinds of noise, right? Find common ground. I can't say this enough. Disagree diplomatically. Agree to disagree. Okay? Avoid exaggeration and either or approaches. The rest of this stuff is in your book and you can read that. I don't know if people